Welcome to the Engine Rooms for an evening with John Wardley in conversation with Nick Robbins. Strap yourself in. This could be a bumpy ride.
30 years ago. Really? Well, he's here.
What a lovely crowd.
Yeah, amazing. Have you seen all the Nemesis t-shirts and Oblivion t-shirts? There are a few. Hands up if you're wearing anything related to John Wardley.
Oh, look at that. I was going to say, has anybody ever ridden any of my rides? But that's those people.
Yeah.
Right, what do you want to know, Nick?
Okay, I'm glad you asked me that, because I have a few. Now, I read somewhere, John, that you once sold a car to a fella, and the doors fell off, the engine blew up. He couldn't have been more pleased.
No, that's right. One of the first jobs I did was to build a crazy comedy car for a circus. And that was in, I think, 1971. And it's still going, believe it or not. I get people phoning me up saying, oh, we just had your old car service. And believe it or not, after all these years, but yes, it was supposed to blow up and the doors fall off and all that.
So you built that car, you've built ghost trains, you've done stunts of Bond films, more of which later on. But most famously, you're famous for your roller coasters. But you don't want to be known as the person who builds roller coasters. That bloke who builds roller coasters.
No, I mean, basically, the guy, Oliver Alton, who was the guy that did the talk here before me, was the star of Frozen in the West End, and he was an entertainer. But you see, that is basically what I am, or what I was before I retired, an entertainer. Just because I'm not on stage, just because I'm not seen performing, doesn't mean to say that I'm doing exactly the same things that an entertainer does. An entertainer basically plays with the emotions of their audience, makes them laugh, surprises them, amazes them, baffles them. You know, a trapeze artist in a circus will thrill people. A comedian will make people laugh. So an entertainer's job really is to play with the emotions of the audience. And that's what I have been doing all my life. It might sound a bit sinister, but it's not. It's basically all about fun and entertainment and giving people a good time.
Now, your book, Creating My Own Nemesis, which is, anyone here read that? Yeah. Anyway, it was dedicated to Ray Barrett. Now, how important was Ray Barrett to your life?
Oh, Ray was very important. When I basically was charged with the responsibility of turning the fortunes of Chessington Zoo round. I had been involved in amusement parks. I got involved with Madame Tussauds. My job was to try and make the figures move, and I was involved with Madame Tussauds. And one day, Ray Barrett came up to me and he said, John, could you go to Chessington Zoo and sort out the fun fair in the circus? It was a nice little zoo, but the days of zoos were numbered. You know, the people's attitude towards keeping animals in captivity were changing, and Chessington was quite limited in space. Madame Tussauds owned Chessington Zoo. In those days, Madame Tussauds only had two waxworks, London and Amsterdam, but they owned Chessington Zoo and Warwick Castle and a few other attractions. And Ray said to me, you know something about fun fairs, go to Chessington Zoo and see if you can sort it out. So I went to Chessington and there was a nice little travelling fun fair, there was a nice little circus, but I thought this is not really going to turn the business around. You know, it needs something more radical. So I basically said, well, I don't think I can help you, it needs something more radical. And he said, well, in that case, put forward a scheme. So I thought, right, here we go. It won't happen, but I'm going to put forward a crazy scheme to build Britain's first theme park. And I put forward some plans. I costed it all, and put it, amazingly enough, they turned around and said, all right, go and do it. I couldn't believe it. You know, we were talking about tens of millions of pounds, and they trusted me to do it. And Ray Barrett was the most remarkable man in as much as he had faith in me. I couldn't So we, in 1986, opened phase 1. 1987, we opened the new attraction, and it was a huge success. We doubled the attendance virtually overnight, and it was a big money spinner for Pearson's, the big merchant bankers and publishers who owned Madame Tussauds. And they said, well, in that case, expand. Well, we couldn't expand at Chessington, but the planners wouldn't let us. So we had a look around, and the only other so-called theme park in Britain was Alton Towers. And Ray said, look, go to Alton Towers, undercover, have a ferret around and see if you can find out what it's all about. And I realised that it wasn't actually quite as it was hyped up to be. I looked at the asset register and discovered that things like the corkscrew was leased. It was just a portable, believe it or not, the corkscrew was a demountable, portable ride, and there were quite a few of them around Europe, but it was being hyped up as being the ultimate roller coaster. Most of the rides there were leased or rented. And John Broome was involved with the big Battersea Power Station project at the time. And the project wasn't going right, and he was literally bleeding Alton Towers of its resources in order to prop up the Battersea project. And I said, Ray, I've got a funny feeling that we could pick up Alton Towers at the right price. So we bought it. But of course, we had to do something pretty quick to turn that around and let people know that it was very special and very different. And so we had to do quite a bit of quick thinking, and the rest is history.
Let's go back, talking about history, back to the early days. Your father and your forefathers were all in printing. In fact, one of your clients is Lord Rothschild. Actually gave you a lift once, didn't he?
Yes, the family business were printers. They had the only printing firm within the square mile of the City of London, right next to the Mansion House. It was a very, very Dickensian business and not something that really appealed to me. But yeah, one day I was about 7, I think, and in those days it was quite acceptable for young children to ride around on the London Underground on their own. And at 7 I used to go all over London on the Underground, and my father had a hip replacement and was in St Bartholomew's Hospital in London. And I went up on the train to visit him, and whilst I was by his bedside, this gentleman arrived with a beautiful bouquet of flowers from my dad, and they were chatting away, and then this gentleman said to me, well, lad, how are you getting home? And I said, oh, I'm going back home on the Metropolitan line. Oh, he said, I can give you a lift. So I followed him out, assuming that he'd got his car parked down the street. And outside the main doors of Bart's Hospital was this, I don't know if it was a Bentley or a Rolls, but it was one or the other, with a chauffeur. And I got in the back with this gentleman who I hadn't got a clue who he was. And off we went, and we ended up in I think it was Hampstead. I mean, bear in mind I'm 7 years old. In Hampstead, it was a mansion. It was just amazing. And the gentleman got out and said to the chauffeur, take the boy wherever he lives. And off he went. So off we go, and I say to the chauffeur, excuse me, but who was the gentleman? Oh, he said he's Lord Rothschild. But yeah, no, I was destined to go into the family business. And that was on my father's side. But on my mother's side, my great uncle and aunt, and they were a music hall variety act called Vadir and Dorinova and the Dive of Death. This is just after the First World War. They were acrobats, but unfortunately rather accident-prone. The Dive of Death consisted of, because although they were called Vadir and Dorinova, their names were Tommy and Reedy Mackay. They were billed as the great Russian acrobats, but in actual fact, I think the nearest they ever got to Russia was Felixstowe. And that was only because they got on the wrong train, I think. The Dive of Death consisted of Auntie Reenie climbing up into one of the auditorium boxes and jumping onto Uncle Tommy's shoulders, doing a somersault in mid-air. And invariably this went badly wrong. They decided that they would have to give up. So they were looking for another act. Now, in those days, weekly variety was literally that. It was a show that went from theatre to theatre all around the country, opening on the Monday and closing on the Saturday night. And what impresarios in those days were looking for was some kind of headline act that could perform on the Monday night and draw headlines that got the show noticed. And Uncle Tommy came up with a very clever idea. And those of you that have read my book will know how it worked. Basically, it was, he would invite up on stage on the Monday night a local dignitary, perhaps the local mayor or local bank manager or the owner of the local department store. And Uncle Tommy would predict what was going to happen on the Saturday night, perhaps the local football score or what was the headline in the local paper. And he would write it secretly on a piece of paper, put it in a little wooden box, close the lid of the box and lock it, and give the box to the mayor or whoever to keep it in his possession, maybe lock it in a safe, or if it was the local department store, put it on display in the shop window for the whole of the week, and told him to come back on the Saturday, and he'd invite him onto the stage and allow him to open the box. Uncle Tommy wouldn't touch the box. Allow him to open the box, take out the piece of paper, and read out what the prediction was. And it was always right. So a lot of you know how it was done if you've read the book. And those of you that don't, well, you can either get the book yourself or you can get someone in the party.
I don't think I'm going to need all these questions. Anyway, you had a visit to Clacton as a child, and it wasn't the roller coaster Steel Stella that took your fancy, it was the Ghost Train.
Yeah, I was quite intrigued. I was probably about 10 years old, and on the pier at Clacton, there was this thing called the Ghost Train, and I couldn't work out what it was all about, because these funny little cars disappeared through a pair of doors, and the thing made all sorts of funny noises, and the cars would emerge a minute or so later with everybody looking either surprised or frightened or laughing or whatever. I don't know what on earth goes on in there. And so I went in and investigated, and it absolutely intrigued me. I wanted to find out how it worked, and why it entertained people, why it intrigued people. And I think that experience stood me in pretty good stead for the rest of my career.
But I like the fact that you spent your pocket money on going to Woolworths and buying a torch so you could see this. The Ghost Train.
I needed to see how it all worked. And the only way to do that was with a torch, and I didn't have a torch. So I went up to Woolworths in Clacton, bought myself a torch, went back down, went in the Ghost Train with the last sixpence, switched the torch on and discovered that it didn't come with any batteries. And I hadn't got any money to buy any more. So I had to go back to my parents who were on the beach and say, could I have another sixpence for an ice cream? No, I needed 2 sixpences because I needed 6pence for some more batteries and another 6pence to go in the Ghost Train, which I did, and by torchlight I managed to work out exactly how the thing worked, how the cars went round the track, how all the things worked, how the skeletons popped up in the coffins and all that sort of thing. I worked out how it all worked and was determined that when I got back home I'd build one in our garage.
And you must be so disappointed for your 12th birthday present. Your father gave you a printer's tool, a composing stick.
Yeah.
But that's not what you wanted to do at all, was it?
No, it was a family tradition. I mean, the printing business went back, I think, 4 generations. And I was destined to go in it, and for my birthday he gave me a composing stick, which is a thing that you put the metal type in order to assemble the type to print a page. And he gave me this thing, and I didn't know what it was, and I asked him what it was, and he told me, and I was supposed to be delighted, but my heart sank, because I thought, the seeds are being sown now for me to be going into a business where my heart isn't in.
He knew you wanted to do entertainment, work in entertainment in some way.
Well, yeah, but he hatched a rather cunning plan.
Tell me that.
Yeah, basically, another client of his accountant, a guy called Jack Jay, ran a chain of bingo halls, theatres, amusement arcades and things all around East Anglia. And he got in touch with Jack and said, look, if I send my boy to you in your school holidays, would you give him all the shitty jobs you could possibly find and knock this starstruck nonsense out of his head once and for all? So Jack said, yeah, that's what you want me to do, Joe. So I was bundled off at the age of 16 with my bike on the train from Liverpool Street Station to Great Yarmouth, told to go to my digs, which had been arranged with a Miss Bond at 5 Hammond Road, and the following day to report to the stage door of the Windmill Theatre in Great Yarmouth, which I duly did. And immediately, it was just a magical experience. I just loved it. Jack must have phoned up my dad and said, Joe, I think this has backfired badly on me because I lost it. And so I think my father realised that was it, he'd lost me. And so he said, well, Jack, you better teach him something. So the next year, and the following year, Jack Jay was the chairman of the Water Rats, the big entertainment charity. And he arranged for me to have the most amazing apprenticeship over 6 weeks. Each week I would be somewhere different in Great Yarmouth. A week I was at the Britannia Pier, that was the Mike and Burley Winter Show. Our show at the Windmill was Freddie and the Dreamers. Who remembers Freddie and the Dreamers? Oh, there's a few people. Freddie and the Dreamers. Yeah. So 1 week was there, then another week I was a ring boy in the circus, which was fascinating. Another week I was actually a croupier on the Golden Nine roulette table in the casino, even though I was too young to even play. Another week I was a bouncer in the nightclub. It was the most. And then I was a projectionist in the cinema for a week. It was the most amazing apprenticeship that anybody could have been given. That gave me a wonderful understanding of the way all branches of the popular entertainment industry worked.
You were working 18-hour days, weren't you?
Oh, I was, yes. I had to be in the theatre for 10 o'clock in the morning because they had bingo. And I'm not a fan of bingo, I have to say, but it taught me that you don't have to actually like a particular branch of the entertainment industry to be successful in it, or indeed to make money out of it. And I found working in bingo during the day fascinating. It really was interesting. Then we used to do 2 shows in the evening of the Freddie and the Dreamers show, 6:30 and 8:45. 3 shows on a Thursday and a Saturday with a matinee. And then after that, I was shown, when the show came down, it was about 10:30 at night, I had to go to the Empire Cinema and help rewind all the films from that day. And then I would get back to my digs at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I did this 7 days a week throughout that 6 weeks and absolutely loved every single minute of it.
And bill posting too in your spare time?
Oh, I was a dab hand at fly posting. But basically, the Water Rats used to run lots of major charity events, and on a Sunday we would swap with all the stars that were in Blackpool, and the Yarmouth stars would go to Blackpool for the Sundays, and they would have lots of charity events, and we needed to put posters up all around the town, and that was also my job. On my bike, I had a roll of Dayglow posters in the saddlebag, a bucket of paste dangling from the handlebars, and you've probably never ever seen anybody fly posting, and that's because they're invisible. The posters just materialise, and it really is an art to do it. You've got to arrive on your bike on site, look around to make sure, and incidentally this was accepted in Great Yarmouth because they were charity events. So I wasn't actually doing it. It was sort of illegal, but it wasn't anything that anybody objected to. But I could arrive at a brick wall on my bike, and within seconds I had a poster out of the saddlebag. It was face down on the wall, pasted with a paste on the back, turned around, pasted, and before you knew where I was a blur and off into the distance. So yeah. Fly posting was another of my, and I'm a dab hand at wallpapering now.
Oh, where's my wife? There she is. Come out and see us, if you like. Now, would you like me to ask you a rather longer question so you can have a drink of water?
Oh yes, that's a good idea, yes.
Right. You went on to work at the, in fact I was going to ask, you actually met up with Jack J, didn't you? This is quite a short question actually. Not that long ago, as a very old man, and he'd been following your career.
Yes, he had. I mean, Jack in the 60s and the 70s was quite a figurehead in the entertainment industry. All the big stars of the day knew Jack, and I was only 16, and to him he was a god, and I called him Mr. J. Nobody called him Jack. But just about 15, 20 years ago, I was in Great Yarmouth and met up with some of my old colleagues, and they said, "Oh, Mr. J would love to meet you again." I said, "Sure, he doesn't remember me." "Oh yes, he's been following your career." So we went to see him, and he was in his 80s, very, very old. It was literally just before he died. And I was very, very touched because he'd actually followed my career. And as I left, I said, "Mr. J, it's been wonderful to meet you again." And he said, "John, don't call me Mr. J, call me Jack." And literally, as I say this now, tears fill my eyes, because he was a man that I respected enormously, who actually had said, "Call me Jack," and that was incredible.
That story is in Life After Nemesis, which is John's follow-up, which is available at bookshops, I'm sure. Now then, you ended up working at Windsor Theatre Royal, and you had a bit of a faux pas with Honor Blackman.
Oh yes, I was a humble. You see, I went to went to drama school to learn stage management, and eventually ended up as a very, very humble assistant stage manager at the Theatre Royal in Windsor. A stage manager is the lowest of the low, and we had a show called Who Killed Santa Claus. It was a whodunit starring Honor Blackman, and at one point in the show, and I'm going to give the game away now, she was actually the murderess. Nobody knew this at this point in the show. But at one point, she, all alone on stage, had to walk across to a piece of furniture, open a drawer, pull out a revolver, go to another drawer and pull out some bullets, and load the revolver with bullets. And I was stood in the wings, and I just happened to feel in my pocket, and I realised that I'd forgotten to take the bullets out of the gun and put them into the drawer. They were still in my pocket, and I thought the whole show is going to fall apart, because she's going to go, there's going to be no bullets, you know. And so I literally froze, and I watched her walk across the stage, pick up the gun, go to the other drawer, open it, pull out bullets, and load the gun. And I thought, this is impossible. I've got the bullets in my pocket. She was such an amazing actress that she was able, without turning a hair, was able to mime the whole thing. It was just incredible. It even fooled me. Well, in the interval, I thought, I'm going to get fired. And I went to her dressing room, trembling, and I knocked on her door, and she said, "Come in." And I said, "I'm dreadfully sorry. I don't know what to say." She said, "There's no need to apologise, John. We all make mistakes, and if that's the worst bollocking crop in your career, you've got nothing at all to worry about." Now, that is a star for you, and I will always remember that.
you ended up on stage and you built your part up a little bit. You were the front half of a pantomime horse.
Well, yes, the production manager, he called me into his office. And
Wonder Blackman didn't want that.
No. He called me into his office and he said, John, it is a tradition in the theatre here that the assistant stage manager is the pantomime horse. And I said, what, front or back? And he said, you could be the front. He said, can you dance? I said, no. So he said, well, you better learn. And I ended up being the front of it. I found this costume from the wardrobe department, and it was the most mildewy, moth-eaten thing you could imagine. And so I had to sort of tidy the thing up and sort of renovate all the mechanism that makes it open and close its mouth and waggle its ears and blink its eyes. And I thought, well, I'm going to add an extra layer. I'm going to make the thing cry. But I'm going to make it cry with such ferocity that it squirts water all over you. And on the opening night, I squeezed the rubber bulb that was going to do this, and the pipe burst, and the water went all down the side. That was my pantomime horse experience.
That panto involved a little bit of dry ice, and you went on to have a bit more to do with dry ice, didn't you?
Yes, for those of you who don't know, that when you see that lovely low-lying mist that floats around the stage, that's done with dry ice, which is solid CO2, which you put in hot water. And there are special dry ice machines that are made for this purpose. But we didn't have a big budget, and so I said, well, I'm sure I can figure out how to do it. And I got an old Burco electric boiler and made a wooden cabinet and put the bucket in with it, and the whole thing just exploded with steam and vapour and dry ice went all over the stage and causing all the dancers to slip and slide around. But eventually I worked out how to get it to work.
But your inquisitive nature made you want to know a little bit more about dry ice, which led you to a fellow called Mike Hope, which led you to James Bond.
Yeah, this was a big turning point. You see, the theatrical Windsor is slap bang in the middle of probably one of Europe's biggest film production centres. You've got Pinewood Studios, where they were churning out the Bond films. You've got Shepperton Studios. You've got Bray Studios, where they were doing the Hammer horror films. I was moonlighting a bit because stage managers get paid peanuts. I think it was 14 guineas a week I was being paid. And so I used to moonlight making special props and effects, and got to know the people in the film studios. And eventually I left the theatre and went on to film production full time. I had a great advantage in as much as working in stage management, you have an equity union card. But I was able to get a NATKI, which was the National Association of Theatre and Kinematic Employees. That's the technicians' union card. So I had both cards. And so whenever it was necessary in a film for anybody to work an effect but also be on camera, the equity union would say they've got to be an equity member. The NATKI people, the technicians, would say he's got to be a NATKI member. And I was able to hold up both cards. So I did quite well on that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So how did Mike Hope get you into the Bonds world?
Well, Mike was doing most of the special effects for the Bond films around sort of The Man with the Golden Gun and When the War Let Die. The effect that everybody remembers that I did, or at least, now that sounds very arrogant, I did. It's a huge team of people. I was one person. But the effect that everyone remembers is the bus crash scene where James Bond is trying to escape from the police. He jumps into a beaten up old double-decker bus, which drives along the road chased by the police cars and drives under a low bridge. And the whole of the top deck of the bus is sheared off and lands on top of the police cars that are chasing him. It was a very, very complicated effect. Well, back in those days, and we're talking about the early 70s, there was no such thing as CGI. You know, everything was done for real. All right, it was trick.
Yeah.
There was fakery involved, but it was done for real. Whereas nowadays, you just get people sat at computer keyboards typing away, and it's dreadfully boring. Whereas we had great fun. You know, if you wanted a castle to burn to the ground, you built a castle and you burnt it to the ground. Or in the case of, say, the Railway Children with the landslide that comes down, you know, you create a real landslide. And so that effect was tremendous fun to do. We did it out in Jamaica. It was very complicated. It was very expensive. So that was a big effect. And then in The Man with the Golden Gun, I did the laser gun.
Yes.
Well, particularly with the Bond films, the scale of the sets and the effects was absolutely mind-blowing. I can remember, if you remember in The Man with the Golden Gun, inside the rock, the villain has created a sort of huge underground power station, very futuristic, which has to eventually blow up. Well, this set was gigantic. It really was enormous. It filled the whole of the 007 stage at Pinewood. And I noticed that whenever we had any VIPs or outsiders come onto the film sets and saw what we were doing, it used to completely blow their minds. And I thought, this is such a shame that we can't get a real live audience here. You know, things are being filmed and dubbed and edited and months later projected on a screen in a cinema. Whereas if only there was a way of bringing a live audience, and then I thought that must be what theme parks are all about. That must be what Disneyland's all about. It's taking film technology, film sets, special effects, but actually inserting the audience in it. And I decided that's what I want to do.
And you moved into the world of theme parks, and you noticed that the facade of some of these rides was far more interesting than what actually went on inside the ride.
Well, the problem with what we call a dark ride in the theme park industry, so whether it's a haunted house or whatever, it's what we would call a hole-in-the-wall attraction. It doesn't give you any idea at all on what goes on. And unless you either have what we call a generic intellectual property, and the generic properties are pirates, prehistoric monsters, or, well, there are a few haunted houses. People have a pretty good idea what's going to go on inside. Or the other approach is to have an intellectual property, so it could be Star Wars or Doctor Who or whatever. But that was the problem with dark rides. So whenever I've been faced with having to build a dark ride, you've either got to use a generic property or an intellectual property. Yeah.
Let's move on to Charlie Bucket. He ended up on national television. So tell us, who was Charlie Bucket?
Well, when I decided I wanted to get into theme parks, I had at my disposal virtually everything I needed. I knew about amusement rides and dark ride transit systems, log flumes. I built a log flume at Barry Island in South Wales. I built a couple of dark rides. I built the Wacky Gold Mine ride and various other dark rides. I knew about effects, I knew about set construction, but the one thing that Disney had, and they kept it a closely guarded secret as to how it worked, were animated figures. They wouldn't sell them. Nobody could build innovative dark rides without good animated figures, and I decided if I couldn't buy one, I'd have to work out how to do it. And so I'd been committed. This was for the Gold Mine ride. I decided I would experiment. Well, I'm not an engineer, and so I started work literally with bits of wood, door hinges, knicker elastic, all sorts of bits of bent tin, and I built first of all a head which was able to not just open and close its mouth, but actually form words with the lips and look around and so on. And then I thought, well, let's build a body. So I did. And it was a country and western singer with a guitar, and I managed to get someone to design a control system so we could actually program the figure. This is now probably 1974, long before computers. It would be dead simple to do it nowadays. The local TV station got to hear. No, first of all, the local newspaper got to did an article on it. And then the local TV news came and filmed it. And the director of a program called Tomorrow's World. Who remembers Tomorrow's World? Yeah. I mean, it was, in those days, everybody watched Tomorrow's World. It had enormous viewing. And he'd seen it on the local television and asked me if I could take it to London to put on Tomorrow's World. It went on Tomorrow's World, and the following day, after it was on national television, I was absolutely swamped with people who were interested in using the technology. We kept it very closely guarded secret how it worked. Again, nowadays with robotics, it would be dead simple to do, but then it wasn't. It was quite complicated. It was on Tomorrow's World, and the following day, I got loads of phone calls, and one of the phone calls was very, very sinister. It was this guy who would not reveal who he was or what company he worked for. All he would say is that his company, for the previous 200 years, had been involved in static figures.
Can you
And
guess
they
who it was?
wanted to make the move, and it turned out to be Madame Tussauds. So that's how I got involved in Madame Tussauds. And a group of people from Madame Tussauds, it turned out to be the entire board of Madame Tussauds, came and saw the thing. And they asked me if I'd work with them, which I duly did, and we did the Royalty and Empire animated show at Windsor, which was very successful. It involved Queen Victoria, who had to stand up and sit down and die. It was very successful, and that was then how I got involved with Ray Barrett, because he said to me, "Look, John, you know something," and we're going full circle here, "you know something about amusement rides, could you sort out Chessington?" So there we are.
When you were at Windsor, you had quite a close call with Prince Philip, didn't you?
Oh, well, at the grand opening of the Royalty and Empire exhibition was going to be opened by the Queen. And it turned out that the Queen was hosting the Amir of Bahrain for a sort of jolly that weekend. And obviously there she is at the castle with this boring old idiot and doesn't know what to do with the guy. So they decide, right, they're going to come down to Royalty and Empire, which had only just opened, and do the official opening. So I was asked to, I was told I was going to meet the Queen. So sure enough, there I am standing, and it's a huge, huge performance when you meet the Queen. About 4 weeks before, you get a beautiful little booklet from the Lord Chamberlain, which politely explains the do's and don'ts of what you should and shouldn't do. Even how to pronounce the word mum. It mustn't be mom, it mustn't be mum, it's sort of halfway in between. That you shouldn't shake her hand with a restless handshake. You have to do a very limp handshake with the Queen. You get this little book. It's an enormous performance. So my job is to say, Your Majesty, oh yes, that's the other thing. You can't ask the Queen to do anything. You must say, if it please Your Majesty, it would be an honour if. So I'd rehearsed my line, and I had to say, if it please Your Majesty, it would be an honour if you would care to go into the theatre to watch our show. And fortunately, she said, oh, yes. So in we go. And it was rather interesting, because when we got into the theatre, there was no one else in the theatre. There was the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Amir of Bahrain, and various other sort of lords and ladies and things. And then there was me and the board of Madame Tussauds in the row behind. And as soon as the doors closed, the Queen relaxed. She was no longer on view. She was a very, very different person. And she, at one point, when during the show, the animated show, the dog, the Queen Victoria's dog, was curled up at her feet. And at one point in the show, one of the movements we just could not program. It was supposed to be Benjamin Disraeli, who had an annoying habit, apparently, of blowing his nose in front of Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria didn't like it. So we had to do this movement and this is the robot getting this handkerchief and blowing his nose, and it never ever worked. He used to get his index finger stuck up his nose, which he'd pull out with a resounding plop. And so in order to distract the audience from this rather imperfect movement, we would get the dog to look up, yawn and wag its tail, and everybody was so busy looking at the dog they didn't see this movement of Disraeli getting his finger stuck up his nose. So and when that happened, the Queen turned around and looked at me and smiled, and I was rather chuffed. But the point you're getting at is that the whole of the Windsor station had been beautifully renovated as it was in Victorian times, including the loos, with all beautiful Victorian plumbing and so on. And Ian Hansen, who was head of studios, who had done a lot of the sculpting of the royal family, and was on very friendly terms with the Duke of Edinburgh. And so after we come out of the theatre, and then we all proceed, and there's the Queen and the Emir of Bahrain, and then there's Ian Hansen and the Duke of Edinburgh behind, and then there's me and Ray Barrett. And as we're passing the gents' loo, I can see that that Ian and the Duke of Edinburgh are having a bit of banter, and the next thing I know, they peel off and go into the gents. And the Queen looks in astonishment. I mean, the Queen does not stand outside public loos waiting for her. And as they are going into the loo, Ian turns around, beckons to me, and beckons me in to follow. And there is the Duke of Edinburgh and Ian Hansen standing at the urinal using them, and Ian points like that to me as if to say, there you go. And so I have the honour of actually peeing next to the Duke.
I just realised the time, good grief, look at it. So we'll have to draw this to a close. We haven't spoken about, was it Nemesis that you were involved in?
Yes, I believe so, yeah. Nemesis, after we did the first phase of Alton Towers, which you had to do quickly, it was very obvious we had to put in something very, very special. And I looked around, I had to cut a long story short, that I discovered that there was this Swiss company that were about to do a suspended coaster that actually turned upside down. You know, we put in a suspended coaster at Chessington, a swing coaster, but nobody had ever turned one upside down. And I'd heard that this Swiss company were doing it. They had a prototype installation in the States. I went and had a look at it and immediately realised this was the right thing for Alton Towers. And the long and short of it was we built Nemesis. Little did I think that after 30 years, Nemesis would still be so popular that when it was coming to the end of its life, we decided we'd give it a brand new lease of life. And last year we launched Nemesis Reborn, and hopefully that will give it another 30 years.
There are one or two Nemesis Reborn shows here as well tonight. And I'm right in saying it went to the moon and back 3 times. If you travelled on that track, Nemesis actually went to the moon and back 3 times, which is pretty incredible.
Yes, it's been amazingly popular. It is rated as one of the most thrilling roller coasters in the world, let alone Britain, and I'm very, very proud of it. But about 4 years ago, the Swiss engineers said that it's coming to the end of its working life. It had been very well maintained, there was nothing wrong with it. But they said, you know, we can no longer give it our support and warranty. And so we were faced with the problem, what do we do? Get rid of it. And the resounding sort of rumpus that came out was that you can't get rid of it. You've got to, you know, retrack it, rebuild it, which is what we did. Yeah.
It's not all been plain sailing. There was an incident 10 years ago on the Smile. What actually happened there?
Right, well, the Smile, I mean, I'll be perfectly frank with you. Our industry has an immaculate safety record. It is a proven fact that your journey to or from a theme park is far more dangerous than anything that can happen at a theme park. The Smiler incident was dreadful. There should never ever be any accidents, and it was terrible. Fortunately, it was proven that there was absolutely nothing at all wrong with the equipment itself. It was an unforgivable human error where basically the safety system was throwing up a fault and they overrode the safety system, which is totally unforgivable. The only way you can override the safety system was to get a special key which was kept locked in a safe. It was a busy day, they wanted to get the ride started, they went up to the office and they said, well, you know, the system is at fault, it's showing that there's something wrong, there isn't anything wrong, let's have the key, let's override the safety system. Unfortunately, in all the inquiries afterwards, it was proven that there was absolutely nothing wrong with that equipment. But you know, I have to say, our industry has an exemplary track record, but any accident is one accident too many. I mean, it was a terrible, fortunately, well, when I say fortunately, I'd retired by then, but it's something that haunts me.
It does, Smiler, there's 14, is that right, inversions, which means that you're dangling upside down 14 times. Are we going to beat that record? It's held the record for many years.
Well, I mean, it's a sad fact when the brief that a park gives you is they want you to be in the record books. You know, when we opened Nemesis, we were up against the big one, the Blackpool, and the big one wanted to build what they were claiming was the tallest roller coaster in the world. It wasn't, but you can't blame them for hyping it up. and in fact, Nemesis, because we were burying it in a hole, was one of the lowest roller coasters in the world. But it's credit due to Nemesis that I think people sort of do acknowledge the fact that if there was an arms race, Nemesis won that year. But as soon as you try and go for the record books, the highest, the fastest, the most inversions, that doesn't necessarily mean the best. So in the case of the Smiler, the brief that was given to them was they wanted to beat the world record for the number of inversions. That was the brief. And I don't say that it's well, certainly not my favourite ride, and it's not necessarily the best ride. But it achieved what they wanted, it hit the headlines, and it got 14 inversions.
I'm wondering, now you've sort of hung up your soldering iron and everything else, did you have some a bit like Wallace and Gromit? Do you have you're up in the morning?
Well, I did treat myself to a robotic mower a couple of years ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time now to say a huge thank you to John Wardley. Thank you so much, John. Okay. Now, I don't suppose anyone here has any questions, do you? Oh, there's one right in the front. There'll be a microphone on its way. It's rather like question time, without politics. Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah. There you go.
I want to ask the most randomest question in this room. What is your favourite party dance?
Slosh.
All right, if that's what you do. I've never been asked that question, and to be honest, I can't give you an answer. I have no idea.
The robot, I would imagine. Charlie Plucky. Next question. Hands up if you have a question.
Okay. I'll go for you because I think you had your hands up first.
What do you make of the project over in Saudi, in particular, like Falcon's Flight? Do you think Falcon's Flight, the biggest roller coaster, longest, tallest, fastest?
Well, as I say, as soon as you try and go for the highest, the fastest, the longest, that doesn't necessarily mean that it incorporates all the real elements of showmanship and fun. And some of the best attractions in the world are not necessarily those that get in the record books. So, nowadays they're building launch coasters, they're building incredibly high coasters, but all right, let them do it, but I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
Got one here, John.
Thank you. I have a question about items that you might have. I imagine in your career you've collected a lot of souvenirs and mementos, so I was wondering if there was any standout items that you've acquired with particularly interesting backstories or personal significance.
Well, I must admit that at the opening of Nemesis Reborn, John Burton and I were meeting people. We had a huge crowd of people that wanted to meet, and someone had taken the trouble to build the most amazingly detailed model of a Nemesis train and gave that to me as a souvenir. It must have taken them hundreds of hours to build this beautiful, beautiful model, and I will cherish that for ever and a day. As far as other souvenirs, I've tended to give away for auctioning at various coaster events, various bits and pieces that I've collected, and I think there's someone here today that has got a chunk of coaster chain. Oh, it's you, is it? Right. But basically, I don't know whether you acquired that at an auction or what, but I mean, things like some of the Nemesis bolts from the old Nemesis were put on auction and went for several £100 each. And so various souvenirs that I've got or been given, I tend to give away for auction for charity.
Okay, we've got somebody over here.
Hi John. I'm sure a lot of us in the room know about some of the theme park projects that never were in your history.
Yes.
Which of those projects do you wish had become reality and why?
Well, I think the disaster zone attraction that I designed for Chessington, which is I describe towards the end of the second book, is an attraction that I designed that I would love to have built. And it, as you probably know, it has a twist at the end where we play a trick on the riders, and they then subsequently play a trick on the next lot of riders. And I don't think that has ever been done, and someone, good luck to them if they want to nick the idea and do it, because I'd love to see it. The problem we get faced with time and time again when coming up with ideas for rides is getting planning consent. Everybody assumes that it's not an issue, but Alton Towers, the hoops that we jump through, and it's same with the other parks as well, the hoops we have to jump through in order to get planning consent, and nothing must be seen from outside the site, nothing can be heard from outside the site. Everything's got to be kept below treetop level, which is a bit of a problem if you're designing roller coasters and nothing can go above treetop level. So there have been lots and lots of projects that I've designed that have failed at the first hurdle because they've not got planning consent. But I think it was the disaster zone ride that I wish I'd had an opportunity to build.
Just a question about independent parks. Just thinking about places like Oakwood, started to close recently. In comparison to places overseas like Efteling and Phantasialand, why do you think independent parks in this country have struggled to have the same or similar success as them?
Well, in actual fact, I believe that the independent parks, and a classic example, of course, is Gulliver's here in Warrington. They have a very, very bright future ahead of them. The Gulliver's Park is a lovely park. It's family run. It's well run. It's the sort of park that you can go every year, and it's not going to burn too big a hole in your pocket. Whereas the larger parks are once every few years, and then the big international parks are once in a lifetime. Oakwood's problem was that it didn't have a big local population for day visitors. It relied exclusively on holidaymakers in West Wales, whereas Gulliver's here has got a gigantic local population. It's a successful park, it's expanding, and I think that it has as rosy a future as any of the bigger parks. The problem with the very big parks is that they tend to be corporate owned, they have to conform to corporate financial limitations and expectations, and that can be quite tricky. Whereas the local parks don't have those kind of limitations.
Okay, we've got a lady over here. Hi John. Alton Towers said recently that the biggest threat to their industry is screens, VR and kind of in-house entertainment. If you were to come out of retirement now as an entertainer, how would you protect against that?
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting question. Because if I'm ever asked, and I get asked this question quite often, what advice would I give a young person who wants a career in our industry? The way I answer that question is to have a career in any industry. I'm going to answer this in a rather roundabout way, so you'll have to bear with me here. The other day, I was on a train from Warrington to Liverpool, and after we'd gone past sort of Widnes, I noticed a combine harvester in a field, and I thought, well, I wonder what it's harvesting and how does it work? It wasn't harvesting corn, it was doing, and it was absolutely fascinating. And then I looked out the other side of the train, and I saw the cooling towers of Fiddler's Ferry, and I thought, I wonder what it must be like to be inside one of those towers. It must be absolutely enormous. And then a few minutes later, I was looking out the other window, and I saw there was a parade of shops with 3 fried chicken shops, all within about 200 yards of each. And I thought, how on earth do they all make a living? And then as we approached Liverpool, I noticed the 2 Liverpool cathedrals, and as the train was going along, the cathedrals were sort of doing that, and they looked as if they were right next to each other. Now, the extraordinary thing was, I then looked around the carriage, and absolutely everybody in that carriage was... Not one person was paying any attention at all to this wonderful world that we were passing through in real life. When I got back to Warrington, I was sat at the traffic lights at Bridgefoot. Now, all of you that live here know Bridgefoot is a complicated traffic junction with lots of roads coming in from all different directions, loads of traffic lights. And I was sat at the traffic lights and thought, someone obviously once had the job of programming these traffic lights, synchronizing them so that I thought someone obviously has a career in programming traffic lights. I wonder how they got that career. So the point that I'm making is, if you have a fundamental curiosity in the real world around you, rather than on the phone, but the real world around you, looking out that train window, looking all around, wondering, what on earth, where does that door go? Why is it that there are windows up on that side and not on that side? If you are basically a curious person, that curiosity will lead to an interest. And that interest could lead to a fascination. And that fascination could lead to a career. So the advice that I give young people nowadays is be curious, be fascinated. And so that is what I tell people, and it's the best advice that I can give. So I hope that sort of answers the question. Yeah.
Oh, over there.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Other than Nemesis, what would you say is a project that Alton Towers you're most proud of?
Other than Nemesis? Well, strangely enough, it's Hex. You see, not everybody likes roller coasters. And half the fun of our industry is, as I say, playing with those emotions. Emotions of amazement, bafflement, mystery, excitement, and so on. And for many years we were stuck with the towers, and we couldn't do anything with the towers. You know, the heritage bodies were absolutely adamant that we couldn't even drill a hole in a wall. We couldn't put a ride in there, we couldn't put anything in there. It was this gigantic semi-ruin that we couldn't do anything with. And I thought there's got to be a way of putting an attraction in the towers. And so we came up with the idea of Hex. And those that don't know what Hex is, it is the most extraordinary and disorientating attraction that interprets one of the legends of the towers and the area all around. I won't go into it now, but I think Hex is the attraction that made us think outside the box. After it opened, people from all over the world came to look at it because it incorporated history, legend, as well as a very, very entertaining experience that no one had done anything like it before. So I think in answer to your question, it's Hex.
We've just got one last question over here, John.
Yeah.
So, like any of your art that you've worked on, what would you say is like your favourite ride that you've worked on?
Well, my favourite ride by far was the original Professor Burke's Bubble Works at Chessington. I don't know, does anyone ever remember the original Professor Burke's Bubble Works? Yes. I mean, that was a fun, happy, crazy ride that appealed to the whole family. One thing that kind of disappoints me is when I see people looking at one of my rides and they daren't go on it, and I think I failed. I failed badly. The more people, the broader the appeal of a ride, the more successful it is, and the better, the happier I am. And the Bubble Works at Chessington, which was sadly enough ruined by big business when it was decided that a sponsor wanted to sponsor one of the rides at Chessington. It turned out to be Cussons Imperial Leather Soap, and so the whole ride was rethemed and it lost its ethos completely, and it saddened me enormously. But Professor Burke's Bubble Works is a ride that I loved. I was very, very pleased with, and probably one of the most successful rides I've ever designed.
Well, thank you very much for that. If you'd like to have a chat with John, John is now going to disappear into the bowels of the building. Yes, careful with that. We'll give him a couple of seconds just to make himself comfortable in the bar. If you'd like to make yourself comfortable in the bar, please join John in the second. I'm sure they're going to be very, very generous indeed.